moss. More moss to the people, yeah, more moss. More moss to the people, yeah, more moss. More moss to the people. Hi, this is Asa Nilsson, and you're listening to More Moss to the People, where each week we're going to be talking about slowing down, even hurling ourselves off of the Ferris wheel of the production first mentality, and choosing to live a courageous life based on our own needs first, and daring to be different in a world where sameness is encouraged more highly than living a life of authenticity. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of More Moss to the People podcast, the place for conversations with cool people who have opted out of the rat race and live a life on their own terms. My name is Asa Nilsson, and I'm your host. Today, I am chatting with Tammy Faulds in Canada, living on the beach right outside of Lake Ontario. Unfortunately, you cannot see her today on video because we're having some issues. And we decided just to do an audio file instead. So hopefully that will be okay. So, Tammy, you left a cushy government job, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro at the age of 30, beat childhood cancer, and today you work with grief. Please, let me give you the mic. Let's discuss what brought you to this point in your life and why you chose this to be your life's work. And please feel free to introduce yourself.
Well, hello. Thank you.
Hi.
Yes, and sorry about the video. We blame Mercury retrograde for that.
Yet again.
Oh man.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Well, thank you for having me. And my gosh, how do I sum that all up? So I used to, well, I've worked in every sector,
Okay.
from private, corporate, nonprofit, tried them all. And
Mm.
yeah, the kind of pivotal points in my life were those moments where I looked at how I was living. And the government job, I had also was working in home care for seniors at the same time,
Mm.
because I love that. I've always loved, I think the greatest classroom is at the foot of a senior citizen. And
Mhm. Mm.
and I asked them, what I was 25 at the time. I said, what advice would you give to someone my age? And I saw
Mm.
100% of them looked at me like kind of that proverbial, like grab you by the shoulders, look you dead in the eye, and they're like, travel.
Huh.
So I did. I just said
Gosh.
thanks.
Ah,
Because working in government, I was working in education. So it was actually
okay.
quite easy to get a sabbatical. And at the time, I was working 90 plus hours
Mm.
in government because
In a
a
week?
project I was doing was, yeah,
Oh
yes,
my
it
goodness.
was
Okay.
crazy. Because I had a service that helped teachers, and of course, they embraced it, and then it took off.
Yeah.
So they're like, yes, take the time. I took a year off. I went traveling to Australia and Southeast Asia.
Mm.
And yep, when you get back, we're going to have staff for you and all, pay raise and all the things. And
Mm.
nothing happened.
Mm.
So it actually
So wait,
was,
can I ask you real quick? Sorry to interrupt you. So
mhm,
your sabbatical means you took an unpaid leave of absence for a year.
correct. Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Please go ahead.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And anyway, but then got back and nothing changed. So I'm like, okay, well then something has to change for me. So
Mm-hmm.
those are kind of those pivotal points, right? Like I worked in physiotherapy before that, and I thought I was going to be a physiotherapist, but then felt that something in my gut wasn't aligned, and I ended up leaving that profession. So I've kind of gone through a few iterations in my life, of leaving those not the corporate ladder, but you know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, there's the trajectory, there's the path, and that's the one I'm on. And then I get on it and I go, ugh, nope, thank you,
Yeah.
and have to pivot and move somewhere else. So
Well, yeah, but
thankfully
think
it's always
at
just,
least you choose to leave instead of staying, right? I mean, most people
yeah, well,
don't
that's
even
just it,
have
like
that.
tuning into your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's always been my guide, is my
Mm,
GPS system, is my values and my
mm,
heart.
mm,
So always tuning into those, but knowing that something's off, you know?
mm,
Yeah, and so the the again, so then that moved into me leaving working, in government, and then transferring to nonprofit, again, which is great. Just unfortunately, you don't get paid very well there, so that's not
mm.
sustainable.
No.
But I produced galas, and another life. I was an event planner,
Oh,
from
that
my
sounds
organizing my prom.
okay. Starting there, girl. Good,
Prom, yeah,
good.
partying, yeah, exactly. All and actually it was when I was traveling in Australia. I had a temp job as an executive assistant, and they're like, "Hey, can you organize the annual general meeting for the National AIDS Federation
Oh,
in
wow.
Melbourne?" And I was like,
Sure.
"Sure, I have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I'm a backpacker, you know." And it was then that I was like, "Oh, you can get paid do this," because again, I'd organized my
Mhm.
prom. I always thought an event planner meant weddings. That was
Like,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah, so then I got back and did my studies in event management, and then did that and loved it. Loved it.
Hmm.
And I still dabble in events, but again, not sustainable because for what I was doing, it was, you plan them all day, and then I did a lot of travel of mine. I worked with in beverage alcohol, so
Mm,
it's a lot in the U.S., a lot of international travel, and so I burnt out.
mm,
And that then caused me to look at, okay, well, what else am I naturally drawn to? And I did a core values assessment
mm,
and a strengths assessment.
mm.
And then that little sweet spot in between is how I figured out what was next for me. And that little sweet spot between my values and strengths were leadership, which at the time I'm like, well, that's really vague. Like, how do you put that on a
Yeah.
business card?
I'm the leader.
And
I'm the
then,
leader.
yeah, yeah, follow me. And then the coaching, I didn't even
Mm,
know what it was. This is like
yeah.
the early, like 2010.
Okay.
Which
Yeah.
gosh, it feels like forever ago.
Yes.
I didn't even know what it was, but I researched it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is completely aligned with me. I've always had that
Mm.
face that people just open up to and tell things. And yeah, so I started studying coaching, and then that's what started that path. And this is the path I've been on now for over a decade, and no gut, no flutters of like, oh, this isn't aligned. This is so completely aligned
Mm.
with me.
Yeah.
And that's the, advice, if I was to give any to your audience, is to look at your values
Mm.
and your strengths.
Now
Because
I
the
have to.
values,
Sorry,
yeah.
please go ahead. Sorry, finish. I
No, I was
apologize.
just saying, because the value, I like the metaphor I use is that, you're the journey of life, right? You're on the road, the car is you, and the values are what steer your car.
Mm.
And the vision is what's going to pull you forward, right? So where am I headed? What's my destination? Value steering, and the strengths are the gas in the tank. So that's naturally fueling you. And all
Mm.
my strengths I took for granted. I was like, oh, everyone's
Right.
empathetic. Oh,
Sure.
everyone's positive. I'm like, but those are the things. So that's why when you bring all those together, whew,
Yeah.
you're off.
No, and not everybody is. That is
Mhm.
definitely for sure. Now, it's funny that you say this because I'm holding in my hand, and I was going to show you in the video, but since we can't do that, the way the way that I met Tammy was via a book, and a book that I read now. When I started my coaching world, which was 2017, yeah, and it's a book called Being Boss: Take Control of Your Work and Live Life on Your Own Terms. I was reading this book and I got to a part where Tammy is writing about what she just spoke about. And I was like, oh my God, she seems amazing. So I reached out to you, and I've known you ever since
Yeah.
then. I mean, I've never met you, of course, in real life because you live in Canada and I live in Sweden, but we connected then. And I think that to do that kind of work, the value work, is spectacular. And I use your work in my work too. So I don't know if you know
Yay.
that, but I
No,
do,
that's
of
great.
course,
Yeah.
yeah, I give you credit, it's not mine, but to understand what it is that you value highest and most, because without that, you don't have your GPS, you don't have the North Star. What are you working from and to? So yeah, that is so right and so beautiful. So, okay,
Mm.
you're doing all these jobs, you're doing all these careers, you find your beautiful sweet spot of ooh, coaching and leadership, and I've got
Mhm.
this. I'm able to do this. Now, where now you're talking about 2010, 2011, yeah?
Yep.
So 11 years ago,
Yep.
12 years ago. And
Yeah.
how did you then, because you've tried so many things and seen different things, how have you found that you come back to center when you need to reconnect with yourself?
Oh my gosh. So many things. So I also did my yoga training. So actually in
Mm,
2011, that's when I left the event career
okay.
and moved to California to go train down there. And that was an absolute missing puzzle piece for me. And that
Mm,
continues now to be what brings me back to center
mm,
is my spirituality.
yeah.
I didn't really know what was missing I never really was religious growing up or anything like that, but just connecting to something bigger than me, knowing that we are all connected,
Mhm,
uh, really helps to ground me. And now that I live by the beach every day, right? I go for walks down by the water because that
mm,
for me is also very grounding.
yeah.
Just seeing the cycles of life too. Like I'm fortunate to live in a country that has 4 seasons.
Yes.
Right, so we're in the depths of winter right now, so time of rest and reflection, and I'm reminding myself of that, and especially with the work I do for people that are grieving as well, that everything's in a cycle, right? No
Mm,
storm lasts forever. So,
no.
looking out your window and seeing that, looking for those signs of beauty in life
Mm,
to help bring you back. So when you are in the depths, to also help bring you back up.
mm,
So nature really is
mm,
my biggest one, and then meditation, journaling, kind of again all those tools I learned in my yoga training.
yeah.
Movement.
Do you
Yeah.
use yoga with your clients?
I do, but not in the kind of westernized, version of yoga, more in the philosophies of
Okay.
it. So
Yeah.
not the movement so much. I will do breathing practices with them, or
Mm,
sometimes, if they are needing more grounding, we'll talk about how to do that through the legs and the feet and the root
mm,
chakra and stuff like that. But
mhm,
yeah, but more for the philosophies,
mm.
which it's so funny because I think it's like number 2 or chapter 2 of the sutras, it's like or not anyway, it's number 2 of the sutras, is, if like number 1's like, if something's working, great. Number 2 is if it's not, stop, like atas, just stop,
Yeah, if it's
reevaluate.
not,
And so
don't do
that's
it.
yeah, stop doing it,
I like
which
those
I love
simple
that
lessons.
brilliance. It's 5,000 years old
Yeah.
and still applicable today, right? So if it's working, great. If it's not, stop.
Mm,
Take a look, take a breath, see what
gosh.
you can do
Yeah.
differently.
As I uncross my legs to ground my to ground
Yeah,
myself. Uh-huh,
I know. I just
uh-huh.
straightened up.
Mhm. Yeah. I think that it's interesting that
Yeah.
you also said
So,
about living next to the water, that you choose to live near the water. Um, for the audience who does not know this, you and I share a birthday, not the same year, but the same
mm,
day, July 17th. And that, of course, is a Cancer sign. That is the astrological sign of Cancer. Our sun sign is Cancer. So we need
mhm,
water to ground ourselves. And we are ruled by the moon, which is also interesting, which also has a lot to do with the water. So,
mhm,
how now working with grief, because this is why I thought it was so interesting, because in my perception, for what I see in my own life and my own coaching practice, is there is so much grief in our world.
mm,
And um, you choosing to work with this, which to some people, I mean, death is the worst thing people can imagine. Many people cannot imagine a worse thing than dying, which I personally don't feel that way. But you and I having conversations about, well, you know, how can you work with grief and death and dying and fear, and how do how do you navigate this in your own life and be able to be the guiding light for people who are looking for so much support and help right now?
mhm. Yeah, it's Something looking back, I realize I've dealt with grief my whole life because grief I thought was just associated with death, but it's not true. There's over 40 types of loss that we will encounter in our lives.
Mm.
And looking back, I had a cancer diagnosis when I was 6. So I had a loss of community, right? Because I had missed a year of school. So loss
Yeah,
of community, routine, familiarity, and then I always give the example of the pandemic. Look how much we lost in such a
sure.
short time, right?
Yes.
Routine, faith, trust, a whole lot of things.
Yes.
Um, so understanding grief, befriending it, because again, we're kind of taught that anything that makes us feel bad or uncomfortable, we shun, right? We orphan. We just no, I do not want to feel you. I'm gonna focus over here instead. I'll look for the joy. I'll be grateful. I'll do all these things.
Right.
Again, which work to some degree, but we need to be holistic in our approach of how we look at all these emotions. So understanding grief and knowing that there's a lot of gifts in that. You may not feel it in that exact moment, but
No.
there's always, again, we go back to the cycles of life, right? We need the dark to see the light.
Yes.
So understanding it helps me to process it. So kind of that emotional, granularity. So I'm sad, yes, but what's underneath that? Is it disappointment, resentment, jealousy? Like what are
Mhm.
the actual emotions that you can tease out so that you can then move them through? Because emotions are energy, right?
Yes.
So when they come up in our bodies, we need to either breathe them through, write them through, talk them through, whatever it is, just move that energy through. So that for me in my work is what allows me to be present and whole and know I've walked this path from a very young age.
Yeah.
I've had numerous, as we all have, right? Numerous losses in our lives. Uh, but my intention is to shine a loving, compassionate light on
Mm.
a traditionally very dark and heavy topic, to
Mm.
normalize it, to understand that you're not alone in that, even though it feels so isolating, and help, or just guide you through that path. And that's what I use is called the grief recovery method, which is an evidence-based step-by-step program that helps you to just complete the pain of the past. It's not
Mm.
closure. I don't think that
Mm.
exists. They're always going to be with you and you should carry them forward with you, but it's completing that pain so that you can take those next steps forward in your own life.
Ooh, that
So
was really good. I
also
like
being
that.
by the water helps me. Yeah, helps
Mm.
me. I joke that I wish I had video, but I put a little bowl in front of me, like visually with my arms, so that if you and I were talking and you're just dumping all your emotions in there,
Mm.
I'm not kidding you. I go outside after and I dump it in the water. I'm like, here you
Okay.
go, Mother Nature,
Here.
compost, recycle this.
Get
Not
this.
for me to
Yeah,
carry.
that's right. And it isn't for you to
Yeah.
carry, but it's still you're holding a space and a container for your
Mm.
clients that have to get this out. And I think that is so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's
And
not
that's the
closure
freedom.
of
Yeah.
pain. God, but it's beautiful. It's not closure of pain, it's
Yeah.
completion of the pain so you can move forward with
Yeah.
your
Yeah. You're
life.
just moving those emotions. Yeah,
Phew,
exactly.
that
Otherwise,
is
right, we know what happens.
yes.
We stuff them down and we
Oh my
know the body
gosh.
keeps score.
Oh,
Yeah.
for sure. And we numb out, we choose alternative methods of dealing and coping with our sadness, our grief, our
Yeah.
I was when I was looking at your website, I was so surprised. I mean, I never even thought it because you think about grief, it's like, oh yeah, my dog died, or my cat died, or my dad died, or my best friend died. And it's like, what about divorce? What about, loss of
Mhm.
community? I mean, all these things that you just said, they're so important for us as human beings, the human condition and sharing our stories. And you you said something the other day when we were talking before we were going to meet, and that was we're all going to die one day. The question is, how do you want to live? And that to
Mhm.
me is so perfectly stated because that falls so in line with the whole more moss to the people, the whole the movement of, well, we're all going to drop dead. We all have a timestamp on our forehead. So what if we have a choice, which we do have a choice, how do we choose to live today? And
Mhm.
you are doing this beautiful work and offering people who are hurting so badly the opportunity to see a way out, to see their way
Mhm.
through it, right? Because
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to do this bypassing anything. You're going to have to do the work. Now,
Mhm.
like I told you, 2005 sucked for me. My dad died, one of my best friends died, and I never did the work. I never did grief counseling. I never did. I had to, it's now 2022, 23, and I'm still going through this process. It
Mhm.
still comes back. So
Mhm.
you work in tandem with other people. You work with attorneys, you work with therapists, you work with death doulas. Can you explain a little bit? Because I mean, obviously it's real important as a coach that we
Mhm.
do the coach's work. We don't do therapist work. We don't
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
attorney's work. What what do you think for people who need help right now, that who don't have a team? Like if you are getting, like, say for example, me, I have a mother that's 80, nearly 87 years old. She has a team of people that support her. Well, I'm 55 years old, and who do I need to have on my team of people that I should be thinking about? Because when the day does come, I don't want to be that somebody else has to sit and figure all this out, like the attorneys, like
Mhm.
all that stuff. Do you have any tips on things like that that you've come across?
Mhm. Yeah, and just to be clear, right, you're saying with coaching. So yeah, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor. I help you, take you where you are, move you through, right, as we discussed. So
Mhm,
moving you forward from that.
mhm,
But yes, I do work often in tandem with therapists, like people, clients that come to me have their therapy at the same time.
mhm,
But again, yeah, if you don't have that, the there's so many things you can do. And you touched on a few in there. I am a death doula as well, and what
okay,
I focus on in terms of that work, because even with death doulas, there are non-medical support, for the client and their families. So everything from all the
mm,
advanced planning, which is everything you've touched on there, like the end of life paperwork, all the proxies, getting the estate, all that's in order. And again, doulas can either sit bedside, hold vigil, and as well as
mm,
after with the paperwork and everything, getting that organized.
mm,
So if you're listening to this and going, I don't have my team,
yeah,
start with you.
mm,
There is actually, I put together a coping with grief workbook in there. I guess if it's something it's grief specific that you're looking for. Otherwise, I mean, depending on where you live, there's really great online resources. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm listening to this, and actually, stats are in Canada, under 25% of people have their end of life paperwork together. But again, spoiler alert, 100% of us are going to die. So
Wait, hold
how
on,
can
hold on,
we?
hold
How
on.
can
Let's
we?
get back to what you
How
just
can
said.
we fill that gap?
25% of people in Canada do not have their end of life paperwork in order. Is that what you just said?
Only 25%. So
Okay, only.
75% don't.
Okay, and that's, like, regardless of age, only. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
I mean, you look at Aretha Franklin, Prince, there's even, celebrities that didn't have. They have these massive estates and didn't
Right?
have their paperwork.
My
So
gosh.
if you're listening to this and going, oh my gosh, I need to get mine together.
Mhm,
So I know here in Canada, there's a brilliant online resource called Willful. In the US, there's one called Five Wishes. So if you just kind of look in your local um, jurisdiction, you'll see, because even within a country, it varies.
yeah, yeah, right, of
So
course.
just look to see online will or online estate planning, whatever that is.
Mm,
You'll find a whole host of resources. I'm saying, if you can empower yourself to take those steps,
mm,
and the more you can get together now, uh, it's so imperative, because if you think about it, if you fast forward, as you say, we all have a timestamp. We don't know when that is.
no,
So imagine if, you have a diagnosis, you have some limited time, knowing you don't have to deal with all of this, right?
mm,
All the paperwork. It
mhm,
means you and your loved ones just have to be present and love you through that transition. There's
yeah,
nothing else to do. Everything else taken care of. What a beautiful gift,
it really
right?
is.
Because time,
Yes.
you ask anyone, who's been in those situations, the deathbed regrets, or I just wish I had, more time.
Right,
So having the paperwork done gives you that gift of time, because you're not scrambling and trying to figure everything out when you're emotionally not
right,
stable.
right,
So
and have you
empower
ever
yourself, look into your own, yeah, your own places.
well, I think that's, and these things, that what's important about these documents are they can always be updated. Just because you get them done
Hmm.
now doesn't mean that you can't change them, or you can. I mean, especially in America,
Exactly.
North America, where you have to name um, whatever they're called, imperators. I have no idea what that means, but me what the word is, but you can
Yeah.
change that kind of stuff all the time. Just get it
Yes.
started. And I bought this package once from Susie Orman. I don't know if you've ever heard anybody talk about that,
Mhm.
but she has like $100 or something. She puts out sales all the time. And I love me some Susie Ormans because I love talking about death and I love talking about money. So she has a whole package that you can buy with all these pre-planned like forms that are already in there that you just have to fill out. So
Yeah.
depending on what state you're in and all that kind of stuff, but it's a very fair price because she obviously knows that it costs a ton of money if you're going to attorneys to get this kind of stuff done, getting them
Mhm.
drafted from the beginning and all that. But
Yeah.
it's there's resources available to us, and preparation is definitely key. And I lived through that with my father when he got diagnosed with cancer. He was given 2 months to live, and he ended up living 5 years, which thankfully we were
Mhm.
very thankful for that. But the fact then that he did have to scramble because he didn't have everything in order. Everything was not in
Yeah.
order. And then my mother had to learn everything. She had never had
Mhm.
access to any of that kind of information. So she had to learn as
Mhm.
well. But the you said about the shadows and looking at going into the darkness and working through the gold mine of working through those shadows with the light and the dark. Do you have any tips for anybody that's kind of willing to start doing a little bit of work on themselves and go a little bit deeper maybe in their grief process other than, I mean, just like kind of to start going within, maybe if they're not ready for
Mhm.
the workbook or they're not ready to go to a therapist or go to the next place, but maybe just to like a little exercise or something that you do, that you can give as a recommendation for somebody just getting started.
Yeah, I mean, it's unique to everyone, right? Like grief
Mhm.
isn't a cookie cutter experience. It's unique and individual to you because it's about the relationship you have to whatever it is that you're grieving, whether it's money or an actual person or a pet or, so understanding that as we discussed earlier was that again, there's light and dark. We're often scared of the dark, right?
Mhm.
But if you can shift your perspective, almost befriend, uh, what might be in there? As we talked about, there's I believe there's gold in those shadows, right? And that's why we have to
Mhm.
go in there with kind of our little headlamp on and go, okay, but a really compassionate and loving light is what I
Mhm.
can't stress enough about that. Because it is. These things can be difficult to look at. And you can do hard things, right? To quote,
Yes.
Glennon
Yep.
Doyle, we can
Yes.
do this.
Yep.
And people that, for me personally, for my clients that I've walked through that, the liberation that is achieved by going through and going, "Oh, that wasn't so bad. Okay," because
Mm.
we expend more energy trying to outrun, outsmart, these uncomfortable things that if we
Sure.
just turn and face, and again, like I said, kind of befriend,
Mhm. Yep.
"Hey, how are you? Come on in. I'll put the kettle on. Let's have a conversation."
Mhm.
Because these are all you can't get through life without loss.
No.
So the more you can integrate that into your life, again, looking at cycles of nature, understanding that that's a part of it and going with the flow here than
Mhm.
trying to swim upstream,
Right. Oh gosh.
So for anyone, yeah, just looking to just start researching and but again, for me, it's more that perspective shift of, okay, I can take a breath here. I can look at this. I can do this and look to see, what others, when you see others, okay, well, they seem to be doing that. Like go to my website, I have a
Yeah.
ton of articles and that on there. You can just start. And I really do try to, like, feminize, 'cause I think, like, death has just been, portrayed as this grim reaper, this dark, shadowy thing that comes in the forest and steals, like, children or whatever,
Gets
right?
the
It's like,
kids
"No, no,
right.
no, how about" yeah, like, how about instead, it's as I look at the beach, I'm like, it's perhaps more of a feminine presence, like a loving motherly presence who has a cup of tea and a flowy, hair and dress on and just wants to sit and have a conversation by the fire.
Mm.
Right? Because we don't
Mhm.
know.
No.
No one
No.
knows what happens at the point of death. We have these stories. So you can write your own story about that. So maybe it starts with, I don't need to be scared of death anymore. And that's what's so cool with
Mhm.
psychedelics, now that uh psilocybin magic mushrooms are, and they've done all this research from the 60s onwards about how doing that allows people to see that there is nothing to fear, that there is just such a oneness and such a beauty. And even you hear people, at their points of transition that they're like, oh, like Steve Jobs, right? Like, oh, wow, wow. Like there's such a peace that comes over people. So if that's, for me, I'm going to choose to believe that that's what it's like, that it's this beautiful, loving, peaceful experience and not something to fear, because that's going to help me in my present day.
Mm.
I don't know what's going to happen at the actual point, but
No.
if it's going to help me live a bigger, fuller, more wholehearted life, I'm going to choose that path.
Mm.
So again, it's just perspective.
Well, you mentioned that when we spoke the other day, there was a Netflix series that you had mentioned about this with the psilocybin and the MDMA and all that. And it was called How to Change Your Mind. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yeah. We watched it. Thomas and I watched it. And it was very interesting because I thought this was something just new and I had no idea it was so old, that this had been researched so far back, and then they had to stop with it. But it's interesting. It's interesting to consider. Just, I like to learn. That's why I have people on here that will have these interesting and cool conversations and are willing to talk about death and willing to talk about the process. And I really appreciate you taking the time today out of your busy schedule. And I do really love you saying about the gentle and compassionate light, putting a gentle and compassionate light when we look at our shadows, because that was something new that I hadn't considered for myself, because the shame and the embarrassment or the fears, all these huge, big, scary words that people think that they're going to find when they start doing this type of shadow work, and to find out what am I so afraid of? What and people are always saying, what's the worst thing that can happen? Or how can we potentially switch that to what's the best thing that can happen? It's a reframing of perspective. And like you said, it's gonna 100% of us will die. We will
Yeah.
pass through. Yeah, it's gonna be happening. So what can we do today to
Yeah.
kind of feel better around it? All right. Well, Tammy, thank you so, so much for your time today. And people, I'm going to put all your contact information, your websites, and your social media channels and all that in the show notes. Is there anything else? Any last minute thoughts or tips or
Yes.
ideas? Good. What is it?
I'm sitting here. I'm like, oh. Just it reminds me, as you were saying that, because I originally, so when I was life coaching, I understood the more I talked to people, everything kind of boiled down to a fear of death. So I started actually exploring death that way. But then I realized grief was the more accessible path. So that would be, again, just another tip for your audience, is that if you do have a fear of death, which is legit, or you're not alone in that,
Yeah, no.
look at grief first. Because that can be the one where you're like, oh, okay, I understand that a bit. I know what loss feels like. And that can be your path then towards understanding death a bit more. Because that's exactly how my career transitioned. I started in death. I'm like, it felt too arm's length for people. They love talking about it at parties, but they never wanted to actually do the work around it. So grief ended up being that one that was more, again, like palatable for people.
Okay.
So start there
Right.
if you do have that. But yeah, that would be it. And just read up and watch there's so many good documentaries and everything around it now. So just,
Yeah.
research.
Have the discussions, right? Have the conversations, talk to
Yeah.
people, have conversations like this with your family, or, if you're having a dinner party, why can't we talk about something like this? I don't think that this isn't taboo. This is fantastic. And we can also encourage
Yeah.
one another to start filling out the paperwork. We can even have like a get together. We can have like a fika, which is a Swedish version of like a coffee break, coffee, like clutch, where you can get together and just bring a packet and just get it started.
Oh,
Because if we get things started, then
exactly.
we get it in motion, just like your energy in motion, our emotions. It's the same thing. It's like we have to start something, and then it becomes like a ripple effect where we start to recognize, oh my gosh, my mom hasn't done this, my brother hasn't done this, my sister, oh my gosh, right? And it's
Yeah, just
it is,
normalize it.
yes,
Well,
normalize
it's
it.
interesting because my friend in Amsterdam sent me a picture. They have beer coasters at the pubs there. This is years ago, but it had all these like end of life questions on the beer coasters because that was their thought. If we're
That's
gathering
cool.
together to have a drink, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh
Yeah.
my
Let's
god.
talk about something important.
Yeah, yeah, not
Let's
the
talk about
weather.
something cool like this. Yeah. That's neat.
Yeah.
That's a neat
Yeah,
idea.
they're
I like
rich
that.
conversations. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
They are. They really, they are. Well, thank you for this rich conversation today. Thank you for
Yeah.
your time. And I would love to have you back. I think that this is a super interesting
Mhm.
topic. And the more I learn, the more questions I have, because, you know, we all have them. And why not share them publicly so that
Yeah.
other people can learn too? That's how
Oh,
we
I'd
all
be
get
honored. Yes.
better. Good, 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 good. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thank you so much. And I will again put your contact information so people can reach out, especially if they are really grieving and really needing some help. You have got many things to offer them for resources. And I hope that that is something that people will consider looking into.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
All right. Well,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
so much,
much.
Tammy. We'll talk to you soon. All
Okay, bye.
righty. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of More Moss to the People. I am Asa Nilsson. If you like this episode, I'd love to hear from you. Like, subscribe, follow the podcast, share it with a friend. I want to say thank you to Kamel Asli for his help with the production of this podcast. Without him, this would not even be in your ears today. I can assure you of that. And let me say a little something about my friend Gregory Paul Donaldson, may he rest in peace, who would always leave me with this quote. He would say, "In the meantime and between time, whatever you do, do it well, and then pass it on. Peace, and most importantly, joy." I want to leave you with that as well. I'll see you on the flip side, my friend. Take care.